Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
Financial Survival Network is presented to you by Regal Assets. Buy and sell physical gold and silver through your existing retirement plan, 100% tax-free with Regal Assets. If you want to include physical gold or silver in your existing IRA or old 401k, request your free investment kit, which was recently featured in the Forbes and Smart Money Wall Street Journal magazines. Call toll-free 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620, or visit regalassets.com. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz on 1590 WPSL. So if you had your choice, would you buy $1 million worth of gold or $1 million worth of Bitcoins, or would you split it up? With me now is Adam Rabie, writes extensively about that very topic. Adam, welcome to the Financial Survival Network. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So if I had $1 million, Adam, right on my desk now, in shiny $10,000 bills, which they don't make anymore. So if you had a $10,000 bill, it's probably worth $50,000, depending upon the condition. Where would you put it? Would you put it in gold, silver, or Bitcoins?
You know what? Actually, all of them have taken a bit of a tanking, so they all have a relatively attractive pricing right now. Particularly gold and silver look very, very good. But I would say a fair distribution among all of them. But it depends on, your personal situation. People maybe in Argentina or Iran or in Cyprus are obviously looking at Bitcoin with a little more lure than the rest of us, because they have other advantages from just the investment perspective from Bitcoin. They can maybe use it to launder money or to, really realize their wealth that the governments are restraining them from in their local economies. For the rest of us, though, I think you get still a good opportunity from Bitcoin or gold or silver in all those realms, because we still have to protect ourselves against the monetary debasement that's happening. We still need some way of saving in something that is a controlled, predictable supply, and the demand is much more in the hands of the populace at large. So in that sense, they all represent good investment opportunities. It just depends on your personal circumstances, and the volatility obviously makes another interesting dynamic for people to assess, because, silver has always been known to be, multiple times the volatility of gold. So most people who, recommend a portfolio of gold and silver normally recommend overweighting gold to sustain that volatility. But if you have, if you're able to absorb that risk and you're into it, a lot of people suspect silver has a higher upside. And Bitcoin falls in that realm of silver, but it's even much more volatile. The standard deviation, which is just the average of how far Bitcoin has moved from its mean, is 100% plus. So it's always just making massive moves. And because of that, it's very difficult for a lot of people who don't have a long horizon to add that to their portfolio. If they care about marking to market on a daily, weekly, or even monthly basis, anything that's as volatile as Bitcoin becomes a tough thing for a lot of people to stomach. But if you can see far down the line, 3+ years at least, I think Bitcoin or the cryptocurrencies in general are very favorable alternatives to gold and silver. So I think all of them have a good place in any person's portfolio.
Well, here's my one issue with Bitcoin. I believe that if you're holding it, the government sees you as an enemy, and they're going to do their best to try to decimate the Bitcoin market and try to undermine it. They've been exchanges have been crashing right and left recently. And the other thing is, if I want to go buy a beer at the end of the day, I've finished my radio broadcasts. You've heard everything you're going to hear from me today, and I am thirsty. I go to the corner convenience market, which I can literally walk across the street to, and I say, can I give you a Bitcoin? And, the Korean guy there looks at me like I fell off of, I landed from another planet, like, Bitcoin what? And that's the thing, widespread. Remember the commercials, Adam, that they used to have, like, Visa accepted in 300 million places around the globe. Bitcoin hasn't reached that level of acceptance yet.
That's very true. Interestingly enough, gold and silver, a lot of people, I guess, on the streets will take it. It's got a lot of historical allure that most people will recognize, and Bitcoin don't have that as much. But gold and silver also have a tough time in terms of being purely liquid directly into goods and services. And, the digital gold market tried to revolutionize this. So you had providers like Gold Money and eGold, and they came out there and they tried to infuse merchants into this world of spending gold. And they had huge problems from the government, as you mentioned, that could be a threat to Bitcoin in the sense that all the providers were charged with anti-money laundering, and eGold was raided, and Gold Money had to stop a lot of their merchant services, and that sort of industry died out to an extent and became a purely investment-based system just for easy storage of gold online. And it never really developed the merchant community. I think Bitcoin has a bit of an advantage there and seems to be doing a bit better as a result. And the main advantage is they don't have a centralization as much as the bullion providers did, because they had to store all their gold in one central place. Bitcoin is much more dispersed. There's not one person really controlling it. The individual exchanges, though, are huge centralizations to an extent, and they can be targeted. So if the government, charged the guys at McGox, which is the largest Bitcoin exchange, in a similar way that they went after eGold, it would require international cooperation because it's not a North American-based company. But nonetheless, they could go after these individual providers. But the Bitcoin network itself has a much deeper protection because a lot of transactions are happening over the counter. And those sort of environments are starting to develop more. It's a very young industry, and because of that, the exchanges that exist right now, they're very few and far between. A couple of them have fallen off the map already. Their banks wouldn't cooperate with them, or they had trouble from the attacks that they're receiving online. And the growth in the exchanges will eventually come, though, because there's been this press coverage in Bitcoin. There's a lot of businesses developing around Bitcoin right now, and the merchants are starting to slowly accept it. But it's going to be very, very difficult for any merchant to come involved until there's a stable exchange environment. So I agree with you, that is the biggest threat. But I believe the market economy of Bitcoin will resolve that discrepancy, because there's too much value in the network that's being created from Bitcoin. It's just a matter of somebody figuring out the right model for an exchange. And it may be a P2P exchange, something that uses much more of the Bitcoin dynamic rather than the traditional centralization of an exchange. And as soon as they can, develop a comfortable liquid environment for people to trade in and out of Bitcoins, I see merchants being much more comfortable participating. But even now, the Bitcoin merchants accepting it are, like I said, far grander than places you can spend digital gold money online. So you've had WordPress, Reddit, Etsy, and a few big names like that come on. But there's reports everywhere that in the Bay Area you can go to your dentist with Bitcoin. You can buy baked goods and a whole number of services. And a lot of people are also routing transactions through Bitcoin. So there's sites doing Fulfilled by Amazon and a lot of places where you can technically buy a lot of the things that you would want to do, but you effectively can pay with Bitcoin. So it's not entirely illiquid into goods and services, and there's some liquidity into currency. But it's the youth of the market. It will eventually, catch its wave. And I think we're in the early stages of that development.
Yeah, it is an emerging market, and there is a demand for it. If nothing else, it's anonymous properties, the confidential nature of it, that you can buy things and nobody knows about it. It keeps your identity safe from prying eyes, whomever they may be.
Right. It's a huge, huge advantage. It really is. And, technically the Bitcoin network is completely non-anonymous in one respect, because it's completely stored on every single person in the Bitcoin network. Every time you acquire a Bitcoin wallet, you download every transaction that happened in Bitcoin through the history of Bitcoin. So every Bitcoin participant actually knows every transaction that happened. What makes Bitcoin special, though, is all those transactions are knowable in a digital realm. So there's no personal association between you and that digital address, and you can, make up infinite amounts of digital addresses for yourself. So you could have an anonymous address for every transaction you did, and there's no way for any of those to be tied to your personal self. And that's what's made it such a successful tool for, helping people extract money out of these politically stricken economies like Cyprus and Argentina, where you're starting to see a lot of demand for Bitcoin to help people get money out of the country.
Yeah, well, if I was in Argentina, I would seriously be considering anything that I could use. And, you've seen Argentina and many other countries just steal retirement funds and other funds with no consideration of the injury that it causes. And it's distressing,
Yes, absolutely. So, it's very fresh in most Argentinians' minds, what happened to them at the turn of the century, where their bank accounts were frozen and they dealt with that situation. And there's a huge distrust in that society for their banking system. And the underground economy in general is growing. So you had HSBC had this huge scandal of the last year where they were, laundering money for drug lords, and the Swiss government has also had their own set of scandals, and a lot of those environments that the underworld was traditionally using for their transaction medium have dissipated. So, banking regulation has gotten pretty strong now, and you have a lot of these crackdowns, even in places like Switzerland. It's no longer seen as this pure secrecy safe haven that it once was. And the underground economy, and it's multi-trillion dollars, or, there's only estimates, need something to conduct their transactions. And with a general distrust or a disservice from the formal banking community, people are going to need to find a new medium. And, more and more commerce is happening on the internet, more and more, just everything economic-wise is a lot of it's happening over the web. So something similar to Bitcoin that, services these ends where you no longer have to trust an individual institution, everything that's happening to the Bitcoin network. Most people don't know what's happening under their balance sheets of their bank, or what's happening under the balance sheets of the bank's bank, the Fed. So there's a lot more transparency in that regard to gain people's trust. Supply is 100% predictable. It needs a bit of a service economy around it, but other than that, it's got a great it's been dealt a great hand that it can play to take advantage of online commerce. And if it can, it will just explode. The little run-up in Bitcoin could be very, very minimal relative to what it could do if it took a small piece of the multi-trillion-dollar commerce environment.
But one thing that I find a little disturbing about Bitcoin is that when the market overheats, there's one Bitcoin exchange, MGOX, I think it is, that
That's
basically can shut the whole thing down and say, the market's overheated, falling too fast, no exchange of Bitcoin now. And where does that leave you?
You're absolutely right, and that's going to be a short-term problem for Bitcoin as I see it, because eventually you will get a greater distribution of exchanges, and I don't think the liquidity will be so concentrated when we review this a year from now. And that's really all that's got to happen for Bitcoin. It's the biggest threat and the biggest downfall right now. I completely agree with you, is they need a stable exchange environment. The one advantage that Bitcoin has is that you can have real competition for exchanges. So most exchanges in the U.S., or anywhere really, they're heavily regulated by their local regulators. So in the U.S., you have the CFTC and you have the SEC and all these organizations that in some ways help enforce monopolies of the exchanges, because it's huge barriers to entry. The compliance is difficult. And all of those,
or you go to jail for creating your own competing dollars, like
exactly,
that guy
absolutely.
Van Nott, right? He went to jail for it.
Exactly right. So you have a huge threat from that realm that stops a proper competitive environment from running. So McGox could make bad decisions, and they may try and control the environment. They may, who knows, it is in their discretion, their own private business, and they're going to do what they think is right. And even the government could disapprove of them and maybe go after them individually, which could be, a huge detriment to the Bitcoin community in the moment. But it won't destroy the network as it is. And going forward, at least there is an open realm for competition. So the free market of the Bitcoin community will one way or another resolve these sort of issues because it's been given that free reign. You no longer have, government guaranteed monopolies or anything like that in this world. Everybody will only stand on what they can service. So if they're not going to be the best out there, they'll eventually wither and fade.
Hey,
and
so
you're seeing, you're seeing now just tons of exchanges popping up. So, one of these guys will resolve the problem.
Yeah. How do I start my own Bitcoin exchange if I'm so inclined to do so?
So there's several ways you could do it. For one, there's a lot of open source softwares that you could start your own exchange off of. but they may have their own flaws down the line. And there's been a couple Bitcoin scandals that have happened with exchanges. But people are trying to be innovative now. So you're finding a lot of people are they're hiring developers. They're trying to think of a good system, a good way of trading, and they're just developing their own proprietary technology for operating an exchange. The danger, I think, that Bitcoin providers or Bitcoin exchanges are going to have is the same that eGold had with the anti-money laundering, because they're normally taking in money on one end where it's traceable. They'll accept money from your bank or whatnot, and then they send it out on the other end where it's untraceable. So they send it to an anonymous Bitcoin wallet. And I'm not an expert on anti-money laundering, but to me it seems like it'll easily get grouped in that realm, and individual exchanges are going to have their biggest threat in terms of how they can figure out to skirt any political retribution for their actions. If they can figure that out, and that's why I think possibly a P2P sort of peer-to-peer system for Bitcoin could be a strong future for it, because it solves the exchange problem in a similar way Bitcoin solved all the other problems that they do by trying to decentralize it, keep it out of one person's responsible hands, because as soon as it's one person's hands, the government can go after that one guy or that one exchange. And even if it were more distributed, so you had multiple exchanges, it'd be very difficult to take one person. So the government's always probably going to make an example of someone. You had in the torrent world, you had Kim.com from Mega Upload. He was made an example of. But nonetheless, you see millions of other providers doing some of the things that he's doing. So the environment can live on even if we have a few victims down the line that are picked off from the government to make an example of. The thing with Bitcoin is it's such a difficult thing to stop without going door to door or being extremely draconian in your measures, and that's one of the great advantages from it. So most things I see as threats to it are more things that will slow it down, nothing that can really stop its inevitable sort of rise to monetary dominance to some extent.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking here. There's an article that the federal agency in charge of money laundering says Bitcoin exchanges must comply with money laundering laws if they convert into dollars. I guess if they don't, then they don't have to.
Yeah, I'm sure these laws are going to be more coordinated amongst countries in general. And that's the interesting thing about Bitcoin also is, to really crack down on it, it's going to take a concerted effort from international governments to even try. And governments work generally very slow. To put together that cooperative effort doesn't happen very quickly. Most of these vice industries that they shut down happened years after, before the government sort of got its act together. So the hope is that Bitcoin will get a head start. You had in the online gambling community before the government acted, it was well on its way. And same thing even with the eGold and gold money. They were years out before the government sort of took an eye to it. So Bitcoin is just fresh in the minds of government. It's fresh in existence in general. It's about 3 years old. And, the ECB wrote a paper on it last year, and Chuck Schumer and other people have come out and, from positions of power to discuss the threat of it. But it's very, very early from the government's perspective on knowing how to tax it, how to crack down on it, how to stop it, how they're going to regulate it. And in that realm, Bitcoin's got a bit of an advantage because it'll get a bit of a head start. And I think it could sort of push a place for itself in this community.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, if it can catch on faster than the government can catch up with it. I mean, look, the U.S. government went after the online gaming, and they've shut off all bank access pretty much, so that you can't use credit cards or your bank account to fund an online gambling account. And obviously we could get into the reasons for that. It's kind of irrelevant. They will at some point attempt the exact same thing. It could well be harder here, because conceivably, instead of having Avon ladies coming to your door saying Avon calling, you might have Bitcoin reps saying Bitcoin calling, and then you're selling and you're trading Bitcoin right then and there, and there's not much they can do about it. And then you got Berwick's plan to put out Bitcoin ATMs, which also will make this thing impossible to monitor and control. Anyway, Adam, it's really been great having you on this show. You've got a website. Tell us about it. Tell us where to find it.
Sure. I run the website gold.net. We're probably the largest financial data source on the web. So we've got millions of series. You can look up gold, silver, Bitcoin, the Fed's balance sheet, the unemployment rate, the price of Apple. And we also let you price any of these assets in any currency you want. So you could look at the price of Apple in terms of Bitcoin or in terms of gold ounces. Same with the Dow or the GDP. And it gives you a different perspective on a lot of, these markets, because a dollar can be a distortive pricing mechanism in and of itself, because a lot of prices move not only because, gold's rising, but it could be the dollar's falling, or same with the gross domestic product. And you want to try and remove that noise to some extent and price in a stable mechanism. So, gold is often being seen as a good pricing mechanism, and that's one of our favorite. But we really let you price in anything you want. And because of that, you can see also interesting dynamics in markets that you wouldn't otherwise. So, a lot of people have noticed that gold rose for a while in yen, even while it was falling in dollars. And it's hard to see in places where you can't measure things properly in varying currencies. So that's the essential service we provide, is to try and give people a very global perspective on all the markets and a deep insight into how different currencies service people's ability to price and measure the performance of assets.
All right. Well, Adam.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
It's been great. And we'll look forward to speaking with you again. Good luck on the site. And we're certainly in for interesting times ahead, that's for sure.
That is for sure. I look forward to seeing how it evolves.
Yep. And if you're listening, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Go sign up, get the newsletter. You can hear this and literally hundreds of other interviews that are very important, have information that you're going to really need in the upcoming volatility and crises that will start happening nonstop in the very near future. So thanks again. We'll talk with you soon.